I am with the National Park Service here at Waco Mammoth National Monument, and I do thank you all for joining me today. I will admit now that I am not an expert at camels, but I will give you the information that I know about our Ice Age camels that lived here in Texas. And hopefully, you can kind of connect the dots and see how they relate to your animals. Because these Western camels that we discovered here at Waco Mammoth, as well as throughout the West Coast, these are animals that are pretty similar to our camels today, but of course, are going to be a lot larger and going to have a different diet. So let me go ahead and start by revealing what exactly we have here. This is our dig shelter here at Waco Mammoth National Monument. We discovered an entire nursery herd of mammoths. That's what you see on this mural right here. So when I say nursery herd, instead of your camels who only have one baby, every couple years, if that, our mammoths, they have many children throughout their entire life, and they will all live together as this giant herd that you see here. They do have a pretty slow gestation period. We're talking about 2 years they're pregnant, and then an additional 5 years after that. So you can kind of relate with camels and how they only have one offspring every few years, and that's if you're lucky, if they are viable. So this nursery herd that we discovered, let me back it all up. 1978, these two boys, they were actually just walking up this creek bed that's just right outside these doors, and they found just a single bone. It was a single femur. And that actually point to our current nursery herd we found today. We excavated over 16 mammoths from that one original excavation site, and that's all outside in what we call phase 1. Now, this is going to be phase 2. This is when we found a male mammoth. And I will get down there just to give you a better look at this animal because it's pretty cool. It's a very fascinating animal. I'm just trying to play with my iPad real quick. Make sure, I don't know why I can't see my video anymore. That's okay. We'll figure something out. Hey, there we go. Awesome, there we go. So now I could see myself better. So this male mammoth that we found, this is unprecedented because males do not live with the nursery herd. That is the biggest thing that I want you to take away, is that this male is not supposed to be here. So we found a male mammoth, and we know it's a male because we're going to look at this pelvis right here. This circle shape opening that you see right there, that indicates that we have a male in front of us. And like I said earlier, the nursery herd did not have any males. This would have been all infants, all females, juveniles, babies. And of course, we do have our drowning camel right over here. I'll talk about that in just a minute. And Valerie, thank you so much for showing me your camel. That is an amazing animal. Wow, that is so cool to see. So thank you for sharing that. What a sweetheart. So right here, we do have a camel, and unfortunately it is drowning, and I'll tell you all about that in just a minute. So this mammoth right here, the male that we found, is pretty exciting. We actually found out that he was alive just about 15,000 years after the original nursery herd. So let me show you some cool features that we have right here. Here's going to be one of those femurs, very large. Look at how that is compared to my own hand. That's just one leg. Half of a leg, if anything. We follow this up. We've got its pelvis, like I mentioned earlier, and then we have its ribs. And very interesting feature is right here with the ribs. We have an injury. That is going to be a broken rib bone that he sustained while he was still alive. So something happened to him. He most likely got in a fight with another male mammoth, broke his rib, got infected, and sepsis probably sat in, which could have been his ultimate demise. We're not entirely sure. Obviously, we don't have the soft tissue, but it's very obvious that he died in a very unnatural state. He's laying on his stomach with his back leg splayed out like this. His right leg, front leg, is going to be over here, and his front left leg is going to be under his torso. Very uncomfortable position for a mammoth. I'm going to move over here to the tusks real quick. And as I walk down there, you do notice that I'm kind of traveling down into a different layer. And this is going to be the depth of our original nursery herd. That's it. That's all we're traveling. It's just a few feet, but we have layers on layers of mammoths stacked on top of each other. So here's another mammoth. I will tell you all about that in just a minute, but I want to go back to the mammoth, the big boy. Because look at the size of these tusks. Massive 11-foot tusks. This would have been pure ivory. If we were able to pull these out, they'd probably be close to about 200 pounds each. Massive tusks. And these mammoths, they use these tusks just like modern day elephants. They use them as a tool. And they use them to knock down trees, to protect themselves, and also to fight with other mammoths. That's where our injury comes in. So there's a better look at the broken rib. Now, this mammoth down here, Mammoth S, is telling us a little bit more about what happened to the original nursery herd. This mammoth would have been on the same timeline, at least maybe the same layer as our nursery herd. We're pretty confident it was probably with the nursery herd, but it could have been alive at a different time as well. But this beamer right here is very telling as well, because as you can see, there is this thick band right here. That is actually a growth plate. You only see that in infants and juveniles, because as we know, when you're younger, you're still growing and your bones are still fusing together. And now we're starting that this animal was not completely grown, was not fully developed. And as we move up, very difficult to tell, but this is going to be its spine. It looks like our paleontologist has recently exposed some of these vertebrae. And then up here is going to be their skull and their two upper teeth. Now, I want us to talk about teeth for just a second, because teeth tell us a lot. Teeth tell us the diet of the animal. Now, notice how it's very smooth and very flat, a little bit of ridges there. Those are going to be enamel plates. This is telling us that this animal was a grazer, just like our cows and our other grass-eating animals. So this grazer would have eaten just about 600 pounds of grass in a day, which is close to an entire football field. So this mammoth had been migrating for hundreds of miles throughout their entire life, finding food, finding water, but something happened where it was underdeveloped, it was malnourished, it was sick. So instead of this original hypothesis up here on the mural with our drowning camel, we thought that there was a huge flash flood that wiped out all of these animals. Well, now we're starting to think, especially when we look at this one, that they were starving. There was a drought. They were malnourished. This animal right here, when we look at the teeth, we should have dated this at about 25 years old. But we originally thought it was another juvenile. That's why our sign even says juvenile right down there. So this mammoth, as well as mammoths in the original nursery herd, point a different picture of what our original thought was. And that's just the beauty of science. It's always changing, especially when we find new evidence. So this is Mammoth S. And then Mammoth Q, like I said, he is on a different layer. He's going to be a little bit younger. And then here we have a baby, Mammoth R. We are still trying to figure out what exactly Mammoth R is doing here, because they should not be anywhere near this male mammoth. They're very aggressive, just like our male camels. They do not like to get along with the babies. So we know that this mammoth should not have been here. We originally thought that they were actually living together and maybe they were trying to save each other. You know, the mammoth Q, the adult, was trying to lift them out of the headwaters. Not likely. It's very more likely, if anything, Mammoth Q would have been trying to attack and kill Mammoth R if they were alive at the same time. Because here we are at a confluence of two major rivers. So it's very likely that we just have a lot of debris washed down. One of them could have been a baby mammoth. All right. So I know you're all eager to talk about the star of the show. So here we are. Here is our Western camel. This camel would have been alive during the Ice Age, and they're found mostly in the West Coast. One of the most prolific sites that you may have heard of is going to be La Brea Tar Pits in Los Angeles. There they found about 40 specimens of this single animal, and they're finding more and more. So this camel, this Western camel, Camelops, literally means camel of the past. So this camel lived here in Texas, and there are actually other animals, camels, that were alive during the Ice Age. He would have this female here would have been about maybe 7 feet tall, maybe a little foot taller than our modern day camels. But the real star of the show is called Titan camel, or the huge giant camel, Titanatopolis, and those are amazing because they were actually about 11 feet tall. We haven't found any of that animal here, but you can find that throughout central North America, up into Canada and Alberta, and I think there were some discoveries in Nebraska and Kansas as well. So let's talk about our camel here. We did discover that she is just kind of all over the place. If you are familiar with the anatomy, you probably see that there's not really much continuity going on here. It's all over the place. You know, her pelvis is all the way over here. Her spine is twisted right here in the middle. Her vertebrae leads down to the coccyx right here. That's her tailbone. Her tail is all the way down here when her pelvis is all the way up there, telling us that this animal was scavenged. So let's get a little bit closer on the spine. And we notice there's that twist right there, and it actually looks like we have kind of a herniated disc going on. And she also has the smallest clue right here, this tiny dot. This is the nice thing about these virtual learnings, is I can get really close and show you what that looks like. That is a tooth mark. That is a bite mark from either a coyote or a wolf. Because just like we've been hearing in the news lately, dire wolves, a very popular animal during the Ice Age. We had dire wolves in this area. And it's likely that a dire wolf was scavenging on this animal. We're not seeing much other defense marks or attack, teeth marks. So it's not likely that a predator took her down. It's more likely she died and then something was eating it afterwards. So let's go with a little bit more of the anatomy that we do have. I will move over here to show you their really cool foot. But first, I want to look at her skull a little bit more. So as we know with camels, their canines up here in the front, those are going to be much more prominently large with male camels, very large two front teeth, especially with our big boys. But I want to also show you her molars. Not too different than the molars that you probably see every day. So these molars, they tell us that she was a browser. She would probably eat shoots, shrubs, tree leaves, just basically anything that she can get her mouth on. And as you know, with camels, they have a very, very tough mouth as well. They can eat just about anything. Out here, we have, oh, excuse me, one sec. I've got to. All right. Pardon me. So with our animals, it is a little dusty down here, so I had to relieve myself. Excuse me. So with these teeth, they tell us a lot about the diet. And one tree that we have here at Waco Mammoth National Monument is honey locust. The thing about honey locust is they have these huge, sharp 2-inch thorns throughout their entire branch. I did not know about these. So when I started working here and I took the hiking trail, sure enough, one of those stabbed me right in the head. Not a fun time. Well, the fascinating thing about these honey locusts is these were around during the Ice Age. And so they are kind of one of those trees that this animal would have helped to disperse. As animals eat plants, they also ingest the seeds and obviously can't pass them most of the time. So they will help distribute those seeds once they are through with them. So it's possible that the honey locusts that we have here are descendants of some of the trees that were once here being eaten by this very animal. I thought that is just like one of the coolest things I've ever heard. That trees that are alive today are here thanks to Ice Age animals such as our camel. Also, when you think of like a honey osage, or I've heard bodark tree, osage, horse apple, those large yellow fruit looking plants that you see, those are also Ice Age descendants and were once passed by giant armadillos and sloths. So here with the camel, we already talked about the skull a little bit. We did remove her skull from the soil because it originally was over further this way, but we started seeing some groundwater penetrating our sites, and that's why you see a few holes over there and a water monitoring device. So this had to be moved a little bit out of the way. And this is actually how we transport fossils, is this plaster jacket you see there. You can see a little bit of foil, canvas, and all of that would have been wrapped around the fossil and the soil. Make sure we take the soil with us, just in case there's additional bones. And then we wrapped it in plaster. Once that plaster dries, it's airtight, it's watertight, nothing is getting into that. You can drop it, but probably not multiple times, but it will not damage the fossil beneath. So let me move over to the foot, because I think this is one of the coolest things when you look at the foot of a camel. They have these 4 toes that kind of extend into 2 individual digits. And I'm sure you see that every day with your camels when you inspect their feet. You know that they have 2 digits. And it's just amazing how skinny their foot is too, especially with how large they were. They're huge, heavy animals, 7 feet tall, and they only had 2 toes. That's just unbelievable for me. So any other kind of research that we're doing on this camel is going to be difficult, because as I mentioned earlier, she's disarticulated, her bones are all over the place, she's been scavenged, and she's the only camel that we have found on this site so far. So with camels, they not necessarily migrated with the herd. There's no evidence to prove that mammoths and camels traveled together, but it's very likely that they traveled the same trails, just like our buffalo routes that eventually led into Native American routes, that eventually led into cow wrangling trails, and that eventually led into roads and highways. So mammoths kind of carved our very first highways. I like talking about that a lot, because they would have traveled through the same trails, the same routes, just taking natural pathways through their environment. So the camel that we found here probably didn't live with the nursery herd. Obviously, with the large females protecting the youth, they were probably not even going to let them go anywhere near their infants. So I think that's about all I can really cover with the Western camel. She is an amazing specimen. There's a lot that we can still learn from her, but that's it. That's all we really have. I do think that she wants to start excavating a little bit more. We've got a little bit of slight work going on right here. You can see that brush. There's a new specimen that's been discovered right there, so that's why I got to be very careful where I step. So it is very likely that as Dr. Yan, our paleontologist, continues working on this specimen, we might find more of it, but this is probably the only camel we have so far. Same with these buckets over here. Those are also going to be picked through. There's a sign, or one of the buckets over there says camel float. And so that's the other thing we think happened here, is that this camel was actually sitting in sort of a small pond, or what we call a wash. As our paleontologist, starts digging over here even further, we're starting to see more small little individual bones. That's what all these, really hard to see. I can't step over here, but I'll try to get as close as I can. These yellow strings you see right there, those are going to be new specimens that she's been discovering and just hasn't had time to identify them. There's another reason why I can't take this path anymore, because there's a newly discovered bone as well. Not sure if it's with the camel or if it's with another animal. I think recently, as she was digging through this spot, she also found some camel teeth, probably from the top skull of our female camel. So yeah, this is going to be a wash pile. This is just going to be kind of where bones, as they naturally sink in water, they're just going to kind of rest here. And then as sediment started stacking on top of itself, that is all she wrote. So another thing that we're doing over here with all these individual sticky notes is we're dating the geology. We're trying to figure out more about which layer goes where each animal is in the timeline, and how that relates to our original nursery herd. We've identified 3, maybe even 4 separate layers of geological time. So basically 4 layers of mammoths all stacked on top of each other, with this lowest sticky note being our original nursery herd, all the way up to the top sticky note being this mammoth over here that I'll show you in just a second. Awesome. Well, I'll take another second to kind of go over our camel. Again, one of the cool sites I'd check out is going to be the La Brea Tar Pits. I have not been there myself, but they have over 40 camelops at that location. And so very fascinating to think that these animals once lived here in Texas. Camels, especially the camelop species, have been found mostly on the West Coast, not so much in the East Coast, such as our mammoths who've been found all the way into Florida. But we know that these Western camels, they did migrate all the way down south and eventually migrated into South America, where their species adapted into llamas. So as we know, llamas, camelids, all under the same family. So it's crazy to think that our llamas and our camels are so similar. And at one time, they lived here in Texas during the Ice Age. So I'll give you one more pass over the camel. There's her skull again, vertebrae, just completely jumbled up mess. There's her leg once more. And then here's another one of her legs way over here. And this is actually where her skull was originally. You can see the indentation of where they removed that skull. All right. Well, let me move on to another animal real quick. And I have one more animal to point out up here at least, because this is going to be our female mammoth. So try not to hit my head on the bridge. There we go. Awesome. So this mammoth is going to be on another layer entirely. We're talking maybe even the 3rd, 4th layer. Mammoth W is a female. And once again, we're going to look at the pelvis. Notice how much wider that is compared to our male mammoth. And we all know the reason for that. So this would have been a female. Not entirely sure if she gave birth to any offspring, but it's likely given the size of her hips. The great thing about her is that we could see her teeth much clearer as well. You can see how different their teeth are compared to our camel. Much more smooth, flat, with enamel ridges. And they kind of fit perfectly right into each other. Mammoths, just like elephants, they'll go through 6 sets of teeth throughout their entire lifetime. When they're babies, they start as small as a quarter. And then as they grow into adulthood, they'll lose teeth over and over again until eventually their sixth set, which is usually the result of a natural death after they lose that final tooth. And I'd say females do live a lot longer than males. I think we know that from experience too. But the females, we have older females than our male mammoths back there. Last one, we got a little giant tortoiseshell fragment right there. That's it. I can't get too close to that. But there is just a small little fragment telling us a little bit more about the environment here with the presence of a tortoise and also the other animals we found, such as alligator, turtles, lizards. That tells us that there was water here. And that's why we originally thought there was a flash flood. That was our original hypothesis. That's why the painting shows a drowning camel, because we thought they got all washed out by this huge flood. But now that we're looking at the evidence more, and even you look at the soil here, you don't really see that much debris, not much to go off of telling us that there was a flood here. So with the tortoise, turtles, alligator, now we're starting to pick a better picture of what this environment looked like, which actually could have been closer to drought-like conditions in basically an open savanna setting. Cool. All right, so with Mammoth W, that is the last I'll show of her. We did remove her tusks for analysis. What we do is we do what's called isotopic analysis, and that can actually tell us what she ate and where. So the amazing thing with that analysis is it could tell us where her grass was being grown while she was ingesting it, because her tusks kind of leave behind a genetic code from that grass. So when we analyze the tusks, we find out that these mammoths, they traveled quite a distance to get here, but they also had very similar routes throughout each generation. They didn't really stray too far. It's not like they were going up to Nebraska to see the family. So we know for a fact that these mammoths were migrating, but they were also pretty geographically limited to their expanse. So there's Mammoth W one more time. And I will move down to show you one of our last interesting discoveries. Once again, trying not to hit my head. And there's Camelops one more. Another giant tortoiseshell fragment, possibly from the same one. Camelops one more time. There's her skull. And you could just barely make out her eye socket on that as well. I forgot to mention that too. Just barely. Camelops one more. And then, of course, our favorite animal, saber-toothed cat. But that's unfortunately all we have discovered is this small little replica that was found right here on this pedestal. It's not enough to really tell us which species it is, because during the Ice Age, there were multiple species of saber-tooths. You have the Smilodon with those long banana fangs, and you have a Homotherium, lesser known species, but more like a cheetah, especially when they hunt. We also have American lions, but I actually have yet to find out if we've discovered any American lions in this area. But American lions did exist in Texas during the Ice Age at one point. And then, of course, even-toed mammal. We only have these two rib bones right there. But we do know that it falls under this family of Artiodactyla. Artiodactyls, even-toed mammals, such as our camel. So we know that this is, obviously camels are going to fall under the Camelidae family. But with this Artiodactyla, that goes even further up the family tree, the tree of life. So we know that Artiodactyls, even-toed mammals, also think of it like a pronghorn, a deer, a goat, anything that just has an even set of toes or digits as they, walk. So all we found are these two rib bones. Could be a deer, could be a pronghorn. We had a dwarf pronghorn discovery here as well. but not enough to really identify the specific species. So the plan is to start digging here next. I'd say just maybe another few more years. We're starting to focus more on our original nursery herd, and this wash pile, like I mentioned earlier, has been kind of the hot spot lately. So this summer, we're going to have interns, graduates, assistants, doctorate candidates, and volunteers out here helping us to dig and protect everything we have here. Or sorry, to clean. So focusing on cleaning, that's for the volunteers. That's the grunt work. So I'll give you one more pass over on the camel. And like I said, I really hope that we find more camels because there's a lot of fossils here. It's endless. Like we keep finding new fossils by accident. Just about a year ago, we had an accidental water infiltration incident where water was seeping in under the ground right here. We found out that's because the walls they only go so deep. You can't build walls all the way down to the bedrock. So we were getting water finding its way into this bone bed through where you see those buckets. And then sure enough, as our paleo was digging through that, trying to find the source, she found more bones, possibly another mammoth. So thankfully, we've dried that out, we've stabilized it, but I do think that's going to be another hot spot for future research. All right, folks. Well, I do believe that is all I can really share. We're a pretty small site, but as there's so much here, there's so much going on. We have our mammoth nursery herd to go through. We're still trying to put all the pieces back together because they're in storage. They've been in storage for over 30 years. And we're just slowly and surely starting to bring them back out here. There's this fossil preparation deck way up here. This is basically our laboratory. And this is where our paleontologist and her assistants will start working this summer. And I think she'll actually be here tomorrow with volunteers as well. So yeah, I highly recommend keep y'all are obviously doing very great with your animals. A lot more than I do about camels. But keep doing research on Western camels and how they migrated out here into Texas. Actually, just like horses, they originated here in North America. So, fun fact: instead of sourcing, your camels from Africa and Asia, you could have got them right here if things were a lot better with their environment. So one more time, this is our environment. This is our herd. This is our nursery herd. This is what we are trying to find out more about, and our poor drowning camel. So it's very fascinating to learn more about the camels. I definitely did a little bit more research before I met you all. And I am just going to continue to learn more about these animals because they are fascinating. And I hope to meet one of your camels sometime in the future.
Fantastic. Brandon, we appreciate your time today, your enthusiasm, and your knowledge. As long as we've still got some time in this meeting, I know that for folks maybe who couldn't join today, and we're recording, and we'll share this with folks afterward, kind of some bullet points. How old is our camel? Does this camel go back 60,000 years? Are we closer to, the last ice age? Give us a little bit of timeline about that. Camelops hesternus, please.
Yes, of course. So we do know that this camel specifically, she rests on the same layer as our nursery herd, which if you imagine that wall was not there, that would be about the same layer as the nursery herd that was located outside. So we have dated this soil to be about 65 to 60,000 years old. So we're confident she is about that age. But the species as a whole, they were living here in North America anywhere from about 2.3 million years ago to going extinct just barely about 12 to 10,000 years ago. It's fascinating. There is a discovery site in Casper, Wyoming, and in, I believe, Alberta, Canada, where they discovered camelops that had butcher marks. So it was clear that early humans were harvesting camels. We're not entirely sure if that's why they went extinct. It's the same thing as the mammoths. We're not sure if humans were the cause of these animals' extinction or if because it was a changing environment. Obviously, with these being 7 feet, 11 feet large animals, once it starts getting a little warmer, their bodies can't handle it. So we do have evidence of humans interacting with these early camels, and they did go extinct just about 12 to 10,000 years ago.
This is fascinating stuff, Brandon, and you have done such a wonderful job of connecting these prehistoric camels to our modern camels that members of the North American Camel Ranch Owners Association use daily in so many different ways, from their own recreation to education to things like pasture management. And you touched on that and talking about transforming the landscape with the honey locust that was evident that these camels were eating. I know that another species of tree had been found within the teeth of that camel, and that would be the hackberry tree, a tree that
Oh,
still exists, yeah, even
yeah.
even still today. And as we've got members from across the lower 48 and into Canada and down into Mexico, the connections that you're able to make today, tying those prehistoric camels to our modern camels, I hope will serve for our membership to close that gap, to shorten that gap, so that we don't feel like this is something that happened so long ago. And as you so aptly mentioned, we've got tree species, food species that were uh, the preference of camels that even today are still eaten. My camels love hackberry. Miss Crenshaw, if you're still with us, I think you've got on your family's cattle ranch in Kansas locust trees as well. Is that correct?
Yes, we do. We have a lot of times people call them the black locust, but they have the big thorns just like you guys were describing, and my camels love it. The horses and the cattle avoid it because of those obvious thorns. The humans avoid them, but they're very invasive to the prairie, and they can just take over an area if you don't minimize their production. And so the camels will come in and just strip them down. I watched one yesterday eat one right down to, I mean, it was a baby, it was a small one, but that's where you have to get them and eat it right down to the soil. They love them, they're like candy.
This is really, really great. And it's important, I think, especially as we have membership from across North America. The tree species, the grass species that our modern camels are going to eat are going to necessarily be different from, say, Florida to Maine, or Kansas to Washington, or California to Texas. And um, Brandon, would you agree that this really speaks to the adaptability of the camel throughout the eras?
Oh, definitely. I do like how you mentioned earlier how, prehistoric animals, we learn lessons to help with our modern day animals because we do the same thing with elephants. We look at how elephants live today to learn more about how mammoths lived in the past. And then we try to learn from those lessons in the past to bring them to the modern day elephants. So we know that elephants are very adaptable. They are very quick to change given their environments. And it's clear that that's the same with camels. Camels, a fascinating animal that was only found sort of in the western area, the west coast, but they were found all the way up into Alaska and Canada, which tells us that they were adapting to colder climates. So it's when we look at the geography of where these western and these giant camels were discovered, it's clear that they were not just desert like animals. They can adapt and they can thrive in various conditions.
Super helpful, Brandon. Now, another thing that I want to make sure that all of us here participating in this meeting today, and then those who might watch it after recording down the line, understand this might be a question folks would have. Not only the camel, which is of course the focus for our membership, but all of the bones there at the shelter at Waco Mammoth National Monument. Are these fossils?
Oh, yes, excellent question. Yes, they will be fossilized, but the thing is we actually uncovered these before they became hard as rock. So as I get closer, you can see that they do look pretty similar to bone, but you'll also see small traces of minerals located throughout the fossil. So we are kind of in between that stage of bone and fossil. Minerals have started seeping into the organic matter, but we revealed it to the surface just a little too early. Maybe if we let it set for another 20, 30,000 years, it'd be a different story. But obviously,
Okay.
we would prefer to leave them exposed just like we have it now.
Gotcha. Well, this is a really interesting point because I think maybe lay people, not paleontologists like your Dr. Yan, would naturally just assume old bone, it's a fossil. But we have so many folks within our membership who utilize camels for education programs. And because science is certainly always changing, but there are some exacting features and terminology is important. So
Mhm.
it wouldn't be 100% correct then to say that these are fossils. There are camel fossils at Waco Mammoth National Monument. Not completely true.
Yeah, we call them more pre-fossils. So it's during the pre-mineralization stage, but they are in technical terms still considered fossils. Yes,
Gotcha. Fantastic. Great points that I know folks will want to rely on when they're sharing educational information,
of
especially
course.
connecting these modern animals that our membership loves so much with their forebears. You know, those who came earlier. And
Mhm.
I want to touch on one other point you had mentioned about the timeline of Camelops hasturnus. From we're seeing examples there of 60, 65,000 years ago, but that species moves even closer to our modern times, to the last of the ice age. Did I hear that correct? Of 9 to 12,000 years ago, there were still examples of this species in North America?
That's correct. Yes, that's going to go back to the example with Casper, Wyoming. They found a camelops that was being butchered or harvested by humans. So that puts not just humans in that area about 9,000, 10,000 years ago, but it also tells us that these camels were alive up until the time of humans. So something happened there where we just lost a lot of their species, and then eventually they went completely extinct. But they are, still closely related to our modern dromedary camels that we see today in Africa and Asia.
I would agree, and I think that would be indisputable. When we're talking about timelines of, we say history, but even prehistory, we have a family of animals, Camelidae, that descends from the original Protolopus, who was probably about the size of a jackrabbit at 30 to 40 million years ago. And if we bridge the gap from the end of the last ice age to today, let's say 9 to 12,000 years, that is a blip on the timeline of prehistory. So I think it would be very, very fair to say that those um, last holdouts there within Camelops asternus in North America are not that different physiologically, anatomically from the camels that we know today, the dromedary of Asia and Africa, the Bactrian of Central Asia.
Yeah. Oh, yes. And that reminds me. That's one of my canned responses during tours. Is let's raise your hands if you think these camels had humps. We don't have the soft tissue, of course, but we do know that the hump, the fat storage on the back, was an adaptation for desert-like climates. But we're not entirely sure if this animal had it. It could have, especially given that they had such a diverse, habitat, and that their adaptability was, all over the place. So it's possible they had a hump, but it was probably just didn't look the same as today.
That's a great observation, and one again that folks who are using their camels for education, which should be everybody,
Yes.
should always really focus on, because the point in time in which that hump developed is certainly up for debate. But the one thing that I think could be certain is that as a response to environmental pressures, that is an adaptation that would come along. But it's not just about hydration, but it's also about thermoregulation. That
Okay.
fat storage is basically absorbing heat energy all day long, so that at night, when the temperatures drop, certainly in our modern deserts, you have these swings of temperatures. Then at night, that hump, or humps in the case of the Bactrian camel, serve as a heater. So I think as we follow the bone history, the paleo history of camels, and start to see and uncover more of them, say up in the Arctic, into Canada and the northern reaches of this continent, there's a good argument that could be made that that hump was evolving not so much as an adaptive feature for hydration, but maybe thermoregulation because of an increasing cold environment in what's now Canada, essentially. What do you think of that, Brandon?
That is fascinating because we can actually also draw that connection to mammoths and elephants who had, the kind of the shaggy carpet on their back. But we know that woolly mammoths, especially, they had a very thick fur. They had a coat of fur, just kind of like a double layered, just like a Dow feather situation there. But they had very thick fur that was adapted for colder climates. And then as we see our Asian elephants, migrate into the Asia continent, we start seeing that hair become less and less. So Asian elephants do have a small bit of hair, but African elephants, they seem to be devoid of that. They seem to have lost a lot of their hair, as their species evolved into our African elephants. So mammoths definitely had that, similar characteristic where they were regulating their temperature with their very fur. And we're not entirely sure how Colombian mammoths fit in that picture. We're not sure if they had fur, or maybe you've saw the murals up here. Sorry, I have some visitors here, so I'm trying not to get them in the photo. There we go. So you might notice that they have kind of like a bison hide, where it might shed during the summers and grow back in during the winter. So
These are great physiological parallels to draw from one species to another. Listen, as we get close here, probably to a natural ending point for our meeting, I would like to open it up to any questions that anybody else in the group might have for Brandon, or comments that folks might want to throw out there. If we've got anybody, go ahead and speak up. You should be able to unmute your own mic. If you've got a thought or a question, go ahead and throw that out there, folks. All
and then
right, Brandon.
I've also got the chat feature open as well. So if you are unable to speak, drop a question in the chat. or feel free to email if you have any additional questions.
I have one quick question.
Yes.
I know you said how much that the woolly mammoths ate, however many football fields.
Uh-huh.
I can't remember the exact number. I just remember being shocked by it. Do they know how much the camel would have eaten in comparison to the?
Ooh. Yeah, that's a great question. I would imagine it wouldn't be too much different to modern diets, because again, they were only about a foot taller. So, you know, we add in additional dimensions to that, probably be a couple 100 pounds more as well. So they probably had a very similar diet. We just know for a fact that these mammoths ate a lot of food. We're talking 400 to 700 pounds of grass. So,
Yeah,
and
we
of
can't
course, and
complain about our hay bills after hearing that stat.
yeah,
You've given
right.
us perspective.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and that's just it too, is one of those hay bales could have easily been devoured by one mammoth.
It's
All
crazy.
right.
No more complaining.
Yeah, Brandon, thank you so much. I want to tell everybody thank you too who joined in live today for this training. And for those live or watching later after we have um, recorded it and shared it, I will also be referencing a news article, a recent news article about some interesting paleontology from the Anza Borrego Desert of Southern California, where camels and mammoths coexisted, and some of the efforts of a California state park to preserve that history and prehistory. So, in our WhatsApp group, here after we close this meeting, I'll be sharing that link for folks. But I guess at this point, Brandon, we'll say one more time a thank you to you and the wonderful, wonderful staff at Waco Mammoth National Monument. Brandon, thanks so much for joining us. And members, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm glad you all could join us. And I hope to see you all in Waco in the near future. So, we'll see you.
Thanks, folks. We'll see you at the next training.